Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Welcome to this final keynote of our Congress. It is a pleasure for me to welcome you all and to have the privilege to listen to Ota de Lenoardis that will be presented by Marlene, my colleague, to whom I now leave the floor. My name is Jean-Michel Bonvin, and I will moderate the discussion afterwards.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our last keynote of this conference. My name is Marlene Sahakian. I'm also at the University of Geneva with my colleague Jean-Michel, and I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Ota de Lenoardis today. She is retired professor of sociology of culture at the Department of Sociology and Social Research, University of Milano Bicocca. She is president of the advisory board of the Institute for Advanced Studies of Nantes in France and member of scientific boards for the Research Center, CSM, in Rome and Copersam in Trieste, as well as the Research Center for Urban Policies, Urban IT in Bologna. Previously, Ota de Lenoardis has taught history of sociology, sociology of organizations and norms in several universities across Italy. She also held a doctoral seminar at the University of Buenos Aires in 2005 and at the EHESS in Paris. Her main research focuses on institutions, on the management and instrumentation of the public sector, particularly in the social policies field, and on the transformations of the public sphere, citizenship, and democracy. Out of her many publications, there are two that we wanted to highlight for you this evening, two edited books. One that is the results of the European project CapRight on resources, rights, and capabilities. And this book entitled Democracy, Capabilities for Voice, Welfare, Work, and Public Deliberation in Europe came out in 2012. And another book really fresh off the press that came out in January, this January 2021, edited with different colleagues, brings together the contributions of 127 researchers and artists working in 38 countries and 5 continents on the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're really delighted to hear you this evening, Ota, on your talk, Preparedness Between Chance and Necessity, Questions about Knowledge. The floor is yours.
So, good evening. Can you hear me? Okay. It is a pleasure to participate in this conference, and I want to warmly thank Jean-Michel and also Marlene Sahakian for inviting me. But before I start talking about preparedness, I feel I must prepare you for the fact that my English is far from perfect. My apologies for that. My apologies too for the contents of my talk, as it is at most it is a work program, more an exploration than a position paper presenting research results. So my argument, the argument I'm going to discuss here originated from the strong impression that the state of uncertainty about the future, which the climate crisis had revealed, has been exacerbated by the outbreak of the present pandemic. We look unprepared against the future, in a way. It is in order to deal with this impression that I have been working on the preparedness keyword, which is a normative principle. A normative principle meaning the capacity to react and to alert against unpredictable and dangerous events. And I have singled out its inner ambiguity, which calls in turn for a reflection on scholarship in general and social sciences specifically. Uncertainty and preparedness both are integral elements of a frame concerning the future. Historical research at the intersection between science and technology and cultural studies shows that it is starting from the 50s, the Cold War and the related nuclear threat, that our posture towards the future, I mean in the Western world, has gradually shifted from an optimistic idea of progress to a pessimistic one of catastrophe. According to Eva Horn, let me share this screen. I don't know. Okay. This is a first screen with a slide with the first list of quoted books. In that case, it is the Eva Horn book, according to which both the environmental crisis and the catastrophic imaginary, so characteristic of our late modern era, seem to have reached a point of no return. And the literature on disasters shows how utterly familiar they have become now. The so-called disaster capitalism, the term comes from Naomi Klein. Disasters, be they hurricanes or war, have become opportunities for business, especially for financial investment. It is worth noting that catastrophe, seen first as possible, then as unavoidable, has in any case an anthropic origin, that is Anthropocene, or rather, according to Jason Moore, Capitalocene. Much discussion there has been on this term, on this noun, since its invention by Paul Crutzen, on the origin of this geological area, anthropic geological area, on the meaning and the etymology of the notion, on the root anthropos, on the man, on the male, this is Eileen Christ, on the fossil burning man, and this is Donna Haraway. However, the notion of Anthropocene has been incorporated into official discourse since the 2012 Earth Summit in Rio. thus becoming a part of the hegemonic common sense of the Western world, of course, which is, according to Stefania Barca, incapable to questioning the productivist logic at its roots. She calls this the master's narrative, which is a narrative of injustice, or rather, she says, a narrative injustice. Please note too that this is the same future shaped by the acceleration analyzed by Hartmut Rosa, paradoxically, because in Anthropocene, we are rushing towards a catastrophe in a faster and faster pace. In any case, catastrophe cannot be avoided. It can only be prepared for. This is, in short, the hegemonic discourse in the current phase area of the late capitalism. The future, meaning what comes next is depicted as a problem, a threat, a danger, therefore requiring anticipation, be it in terms of prevention, precaution, preemption, or now preparedness. This is how the prefix pre can be shown as common to all these postures, which, however, differ in regard to several variables. This table constructed by Luigi Pellizzoni. You can see the differences. You can see also the fact that there are crossovers from one to the other. Also, the sequence is far from linear. Preemption, for instance, is still operating, as we shall see, within preparedness. Well, preparedness, which responds to an unpredictable event, is correlative to the time of emergency. It expresses a new thought style. Thought style is a notion by Mary Douglas, or a new style of reasoning. This is Ian Hacking, having both ontological and epistemological implications. This style, in any case, puts an end to the risk paradigm. As it is, as you know, as it is well known, the distinction between risk and uncertainty has been established by Frank Knight and then by Keynes, and lies essentially in the fact that risk is uncertainty which is made calculable, processable by probabilistic analysis, and thus manageable through the insurance system. It is the insurance system that intervenes and neutralizes uncertainty by turning it into risk that can be monetized on the basis of both its probability and its severity. As such, it forms an integral part of the costs and benefited profits of capitalist enterprise, of investments. both the risk and the risk society have prepared us to step out of the reassuring frame within them. In the last 50 years, we have seen an increase in the presence, or rather the attention to the presence of dangers which are as serious as they are incongruous with the law of probability, engendered by the environment, by human behavior, and by their convergence. Our society now have entered the age of uncertainty. This is Robert Castel. Precariousness, not only in socio-economic terms, let's say vulnerability, is recognized as a constitutive of the human condition itself. And as said, we are living now in the time of emergency, and so on. So anticipation in this context doesn't aim to avoid a problem, as prevention and precaution still do, but to allow us to live with it. It is this ontological state of uncertainty with these characteristics that calls precisely for preparedness. Preparedness, a continuous state of readiness. Resilience, the capacity to imagine the worst possible, an ethos of vigilance in the face of uncertainty, a caring attitude, an ongoing creative experimentation. All these are quotation or features of preparedness I have come across the literature. Enough, I think, to give you an idea of the multiplicity of meanings of this notion, which makes it ambiguous as regards its practical and political implications. As for justice criteria, there is no doubt that the principle of responsibility put forward by Hans Jonas many years ago underlies the posture of preparedness. But things change depending on whether its expression is found under the imperative of security, of ecological justice, or of reparation. The imperative is adapt, but it is not clear at all to what and why. Let me briefly outline two different semantic clusters, both incorporating the preparedness issue, but having clearly different implications. The first and more influential frame for preparedness is governmental. In this frame, preparedness is a strategic choice for a global governance whose imperative is security. Preparedness is a perspective internal to the so-called neoliberal governmentality, and is especially related to the biopolitic issue of global health. As social anthropological studies show, I've been quoting something here. Well, the evolution from prevention and preparedness corresponds to the increasing centrality of pandemic viruses, from HIV to avian and swine flu, Ebola, the coronas, the Zika virus, and so on. Along the way, a set of governmental technologies for approaching uncertain threats is designed, including sentinel devices, typical sentinel, you can see here, sentinel devices, stockpiling typically vaccines, scenario-based exercises, and simulation to test the capacity to react quickly react. Lack of account, I'm quoting, sorry, lack of 2017 Unprepared, it was a fundamental book for studying this strain, this frame for preparedness. Lack of account accurately shows where and how preparedness represents a turn in both epistemological and ontological, as well as ethical terms, a deep change in defining the problem of social order. Let me condense this turn in 5 points. These 5 points. Point 1, preparedness is addressed to the system as a whole, and the system is what is fragile, intrinsically vulnerable, impossible to secure, and thus in need of a permanent state of readiness and alertness, a continued watchfulness. Point 2. As potentially all phenomena could be assumed as signals for the impending catastrophe, imaginative anticipation is promoted, and imagination becomes a legitimate source of knowledge. Point 3, in the spirit of preparedness and in line with the preemption logic, anticipation also translates into laboratory production of viruses to achieve early development of vaccines, stockpiling, based on the so-called gain of function principle. Over the years, this production has been questioned, often questioned, but never seriously stopped. In the logic of preparedness, scientific research itself must be addressed as a source of threat to be managed. Point 4, as the potential catastrophe is repeated, think at the viral infections, the whole apparatus of preparedness is repeated and eventually takes on a serial quality, as pointed out by Carlo Cadov in a very interesting contribution. Cadov, this one. Okay. Point 5, the last point. All these dynamics contribute to building an ethics of vigilance, whereby the responsibility of individuals and institutions is measured not on the solution of a problem being source of injustice, but on the reactivity, limiting damage to the system. The preparedness ethics is also associated with resilience, meaning the community's ability to react and adapt to the required security measures. The change in perspective that the World Health Organization was forced to operate can be regarded as emblematic of the success of preparedness as a governmental logic. Again, lack of account is the main source for the analysis of this change, of this shift. The Ebola virus, it was 2014, was the turning point for the shift from biomedicine based on humanitarian motives to global health security, and the target changes from poverty-related disease, such as tuberculosis, to the emerging viruses for which the world is currently and permanently unprepared. The change may also be studied in terms of the sociology of professions, as the leading professionals are now virologists rather than epidemiologists. As far as the present pandemic is concerned, it is quite easy to see its continuity with the previous ones analyzed by Lakoff. After all, it doesn't make much difference whether the virus is a result of a constructivist preemptive operation which has produced it in a laboratory to prepare for the worst, according to the gain of function principle, or rather as an act of revenge by nature, so to speak, against over manipulation by the agro-food industry, in which the spillover from animals to humans has occurred. To sum up, within this frame, preparedness, originating from a modesty-driven posture based on the recognition of the limits of human knowledge, doesn't mean, on the contrary, relinquishing the expectation of control that have characterized human action upon the world in the modern era. As a matter of fact, within this frame, preparedness represents an engine for instituting the state of exception, which suspends the rule of law and the related civil rights, and for making it permanent, continuously renewed, and normal. However, the concept of preparedness, notion, more than a concept, it is a notion, a key word, also appears in a different frame. The second one, I would like to outline briefly and tentatively. In this second frame, the background to be considered consists of the ecological crisis and the disastrous events punctuating it. The main contributions come from the literature on ecological restoration and life in capitalist ruins, from feminist studies, and from the literature on disasters, In this scenario, a different kind of preparedness may be envisaged at the convergence between different perspectives. For now, I'm only able to summarize them as tracks to follow, 4 tracks precisely. First track, preparedness as a caring attitude is associated with the ethics and politics of care, on which we have many important contributions from John Trontos to Maria Puig de la Bella Casa. Care is, quoting Tronto, is a specious activity that includes everything that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. This caring attitude includes a new relationship also with things. By different things, I mean not objects. This difference has been shown by Robert Saleh. This attitude toward things respects them, looks at them in a not only instrumental way, and recognize that they have a life on their own. A second track for preparedness is to be searched in the economic field, more precisely at the crossroads between the commoning perspective of the foundational economy with the life making, the work of sustaining life in its material and immaterial needs, which Stefania Barca calls reproduction and contrasts with capitalist production. The track number 3 is for visiting the Donna Haraway's Chulocene, which she contrasts with the Anthropocene discourse. This strange name combines a Greek chthon, earth, with the spider Pimoa chulu. This one, the human being, must be prepared to live together again with this creature, not nice at all, and with other biotic and abiotic powers of this earth. Human beings must learn attentive practices and thought, love, rage, and care, Haraway says, towards those possibilities of life regenerating on the capitalist ruins. Possibilities that Anat Singh shows in her marvelous story of the Matsutake mushroom. The last track, again, on our list. In that case, preparedness is associated with repair activities and repairing processes. Those studied by the disaster literature and made contrasted with the simple recovery perspective. In the repairing processes, the multiplicity of features involved in damaged contexts is being recognized and valued, and as well as the singularity of both the places and the moments, the times. Frederick Keck, who studied many processes, in that case it was the research on the 1997 avian flu in Hong Kong, shows, for instance, how preparedness has to take into account the multi-species disease, both human and animal, to be repaired. This second perspective, preparedness, refers to what we must learn again in order to be prepared to live together on a multi-species planet, to re-inhabit the more than human world, which is represented by these mushrooms. Well, this exploration of preparedness interrogates scientific knowledge in general, in social sciences in particular, which look unprepared in a way. First of all, it should be noted that both the above perspectives on preparedness highlight that we are now living in a crucial, especially difficult moment. Scientific knowledge, too, cannot continue as usual. If only one considers how deeply involved it is with the knowledge in constructing preparedness in both perspectives, in the two opposite directions. On the contrary, knowledge must revert to questioning its own basis and its raison d'être. As for sociology, the principle of axiological neutrality, a doctoral translation of Weber's Wertfreiheit, can no longer be taken for granted. And the value relation, the Wertbeziehung, whereby investigation into the meaning of scientific work is constantly kept open, takes on crucial importance now. Scientific matters of fact thus become, quoting Bruno Latour, matters of concern and also matters of care. De la Bella Casa says, matters of care. That said, one must consider that the two perspectives differ also because they are underlain by confirmative versus transformative interventions, respectively. This is Blitzon, which ask for social sciences to be differently positioned. In the first case, social sciences are involved in naturalizing operations according to the principle whereby there is no alternative against emergency, which is the old neoliberal mantra. Whereas in the second case, they are asked to inquire, in John Lewis' sense, into the possibility for collaborative survival within interspecies entanglements, generating new life. Here I am quoting another thing. In the first case, social sciences are intended to substantiate the kingdom of necessity by closing its wall. In the second case, they are asked to participate in exploring contingent and undeterminate worlds and opening up chances. according to Anna Tsing, who is the lead explorer of these chances, social sciences, anthropology for sure, but sociology as well, have to develop a methodological posture that she calls the art of noticing. And the dance the pickers do in search for the matsutake mushroom in the forest is a good metaphor for those arts. Finally, let me emphasize that only in the second frame does preparedness deal with issues of justice or injustice. And let me argue this point through the example of the current COVID-19 emergency, according to the editorial in an issue of the Lancet journal from several months ago, 6 or 7 months ago. We are facing not simply a pandemic, but more precisely a syndemic, that is a systemic event. This means, firstly, that the disease is the complex result of ecological human-made imbalances, and secondly, that its effects impact in different degree and ways, following the fractured lines of the social fabric and amplifying inequalities. Consequently, recovery, or better, repairing, is not simply a matter of vaccination involving the scientific performance of big pharma. What is or what will be required is a big investment, material as much as symbolic, in the knowledge and skills accumulated in the field of social policies, of social justice, about taking care of vulnerability, about empathy and interdependence, including, not least, our reflection about capabilities. Here I'm especially referring to Jean-Michel Bonvin's important contributions. This should be the cognitive capital for an engagement on the part of multiple disciplines, science and humanities alike, in a mutual responsibility and a common perspective of care towards the more than human world which is at stake now. Let me conclude by quoting the book already quoted by Marilyn Sakian, that represents in an exemplary represents this strategy. It has been composed in the framework of the Nantes Institute for Advanced Study by many fellows, past and present, which are so different in terms of disciplines, countries, and cultural backgrounds, and yet able to combine, to make kin, as Haraway says, and in so doing, give COVID-19 the complexity of a total social fact. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Ota. That was really extremely inspiring and extremely dense. And this is much more than a tentative work program. It's something that is really, really very, very inspiring and insightful, and very not easy to react upon, because there is really a lot in everything what you said. I guess we will receive questions from our audience, but in the meantime, maybe I have two questions that I would like to ask you. One that is a little bit more theoretical, and another one that could be a little bit more empirical, or let's say try to push you into imagining what could be sociology, or what could be a sociological inquiry in the direction of what you suggested at the very end of your talk. So the first one that is a little bit more theoretical, I have the impression that the two notions of preparedness that you mentioned in your talk, one is very much kind of wanting to come back to the risk society, prevention and something like this, to keep the reality calculable, if you want, but not wanting to transform it, but trying to adapt to it in the best way possible, if you want, while the other ones is something that is clearly different. It's more transformative. It's not, the reality is not something out there to what we have to adapt. Is something that we need to transform and to try to see how we can transform this. And so the notion of calculus becomes much, much less important. And the notion of imagination, or I don't know, collaborative survival, or what you said, is something that becomes much, much more important. So my question is, why do you combine these two notions of preparedness under the same label, rather than putting the first one into the risk society and the prevention label and differentiating it from the notion of preparedness that you suggest for social science? So why this classification, if you want? I very much, I loved the typology that you took from Pellizzoni, with these 3 or 4 ways of anticipating or whatsoever. And this is something that is really very, very inspiring. But I listening to you, I had the impression that we were more in a kind of social engineering, trying to maintaining the calculability of society or something like this in front of a future that we do not master. And so we need to adapt to it. But at the same time, this notion of calculus, of calculability, remains central, if you want. And so I was wondering why you classified the two under the same label, if you want. And the second question is about, well, just asking you, I mean, making sociology in a way, this is really sounds great. But if we had to build or to design a project together about what we did in the Caprite project or whatsoever, what kind of things would you suggest very concretely? What kind of research project or empirical design we could imagine in the line of this suggestion that you have? Because this sounds gorgeous, but I am a little bit at a loss to see how I can implement it, if you want, in a empirical research projects or this kind of thing. So this would be my 2 opening questions, while waiting for the questions of colleagues that will no doubt come up.
Well, as for your second question, I'm totally unprepared. Also because through my new condition of retired professor, I'm less engaged in research activities, empirical research activities. And I'm much more engaged in speculating, which is my old passion, if you like. So, but in any case, if I can suggest a direction for an empirical research, I would like to think about the line of the foundational economy. I don't know if you know the label. The foundational economy is a collective, a movement, a network of researchers and public administration and administrators too. They are engaged in value and studying and value all the possibility for make the basic goods for everyday life for people in general at the very center of a new perspective. The commoning of the fundamental goods or assets if you prefer. And I think they have a promising perspective in order to include in the economic analysis the ecological imperatives, because the ecological goods are basic for all of us in a way. This is one direction in which I would like to explore the possibilities for reorganizing hope, if you like, and hope for a future. In this sense, I think that the contribution by Robert Salé with regarding the difference between objects and things is relevant in this context, and it would be included in this perspective. I am very vaguely envisaging. As for the first question, why the same label for two different perspectives? One is conservative, confirmative, and the other one is transformative. I agree, completely agree with you on the fact that the first one is completely internal to the managerial logic, and we have been studying in the capability in the Caparite project as well. So it still is the management logic, but it's not me who makes this combination, because in one sense preparedness is common sense, is becoming or became already a common sense. So it is important to make distinctions between different meanings in which it is used and developed and studied. So the preparedness is also studied by, for instance, the scholars following the movement, the ecological movement, such as permaculture. The permaculture movement and the researchers following them they speak about they discuss preparedness. So it is difficult to abandon them as it's not me, but the people I learned about preparedness that suggests me to emphasize, not separate, but emphasize the difference, the ambiguity with the notion.
Oh, sorry. Maybe I may move on. I would have two other questions. The first one is, would you consider the risk society as a confirmative process rather than a transformative one? I mean, if you had to apply this distinction to the risk society, the one of the end of the 20th century or the middle of the 20th century. Would you consider that this had some transformative potential or just a confirmative one, and that would have been a kind of conservative idea? So the welfare state would have been basically a conservative idea if we could go in this direction. And the second one is maybe this is something that is burning the tongue of most of our audience, or some people in our audience. I was wondering, how can you scientifically give legitimacy to transformative science? Do you see what I mean? I mean, we do have a view of science that is rather based on facts and the observation of facts. So transforming facts, how can it be possible to provide legitimacy to such a view of science and to convince that this should be the way science should be done? I think you and me are convinced by this, but I'm not sure everybody in sociology and social science is convinced that this is the right way to move forward. So what kind of scientific legitimacy could you imagine for this process?
Well, risk society. Risk society is a very large notion. It is an potentially intrinsically contradictory. So I'm not sure that welfare state is consistent with the perspective of risk society. It is true that welfare state is, or better, it has been, was a system of social protection, institutions of social protection, is still saves against the risks. But I'm not sure that it is a good idea to interpret, to read the welfare state development in the framework of the Ulrich analysis of the risk society, because in the Robert Castel himself argued against. He was very attentive to the fact that the risk, the notion of risk, is something which may be an instrument for deny and not for encourage the obligation, the social and collective obligation for protection, for protecting citizens, not only those especially exposed to risks. This is the difference, the basic difference. Your second question is much more difficult, because what kind of scientific legitimation? It is an old question, not new at all, against, I mean, neo-positivism in general, positivism, neo-positivism. So it is a secular question, more than secular question you are raising. I think that we have to fight again, and much more now than ever, because now we are at the end of a story, at the very end of a story, and we cannot still stay in our defending something. We have to fight, and we have to fight for a new or an old but renovated scientific elaboration, able to keep open the confrontation with politics, with choices, with what in general what is undeterminate and unpredictable.
Thank you, Ota. We have a question from the audience, and we're going to give the microphone to Giovanni Matera. Giovanni?
Giovanni.
Ciao, Ota. Bonjour. Hello, Ota. It's a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to listen to your keynote speech. Thank you so much. So my question is, I'm drawing from the keynote speech by Michelle Lamont during the first day of this conference. She have been talking about agents of change. So my question is, my first question is there a moral dimension behind the collaborative survival that you have mentioned? And if yes, in a pragmatic perspective, who would be the most effective actors supporting and spreading these moral values, in your opinion? Thank you so much.
I have growing difficulties to talk about actors in this context. So let me polemize with you on this regard, because I don't think that in a pragmatic perspective we need actors necessarily. We need relations, we need combinations, we need collectives, we need to rethink what is the subjectivity, what subjectivity is. And I think that in this rethinking, we should take into account the subjectivity of beings who are not humans. I know this is very difficult for a sociologist to consider, but I have been, let's say, conquered by the anthropologists who are much more able to include in their thinking things, animals, and forests, for instance, and mushrooms. So in this perspective, I think that we should begin a new theoretical research project for reconsider our basic conceptual instrument. First of all, the notion of actor seems to me inadequate at this very moment. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for that response.
Thank you.
Ota, I also wanted to maybe ask a question. I very much enjoyed your talk. I myself follow the climate change debates in my own work, and you really show quite well how we have moved from a language of mitigation to adaptation. And I think this notion of preparedness is a very important one, an interesting one. And for much of your talk, I was feeling a little gloomy and depressed, I must say, because I felt that, well, you know, the system is impossible to secure. We are in this seriality of repetition. And then you really left us at the end with some wonderful tracks to open us towards this idea of care, reproduction, and what Donna Haraway also calls responsibility, the ability to respond. And I think that makes a nice link to your own work on capabilities.
Yeah.
But I'm a bit of an optimist as a sociologist, and I did want to come back to this idea of imaginative anticipation, which you linked to potential dire consequences of, you know, trying to anticipate, and in that process, kind of, you know, creating a catastrophic future potentially. And I'm interested in future studies and the ability of the ability for sociologists to also potentially bring different narratives of the future that are based on noticing, that are based on a different form of togetherness, and that are maybe messy, that are maybe not utopic, that could be messy and potentially dystopic. But I was just wondering, for you, is this idea of imaginative anticipation necessarily something negative? Or is it possible for us as sociologists to also work empirically and theoretically to imagine different kinds of futures that are not catastrophic futures?
I agree. You are right. I have been stressing the fact that anticipation is a tool. Is usually a tool for the management, as I told. But I agree. In the second part of my talk regarding the possibilities, the chances, this is I practiced anticipation, of course. Another kind of anticipation in which, again, imagination is at stake. Imagination, but we must be aware of the fact that imagination is has been made an instrument also for calculation, control, and repression, and state of exception. State of exception is based on the idea of imagine what is worst, not what is better, what is possible, but what is worst in a state of necessity. So we must be aware and be prudent in considering our possibilities to imagine the future in an open perspective, open and unpredictable perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. A messy future. We have with us Emily Rosenstein also, and she has a question. We're going to give her the mic.
Thank you, Marlene, and thank you, Ota. It's so good to see you.
Hello.
I'm sorry you can have been being smiling all along your presentation, but it's really good to see you and very interesting to listen to you as usual.
Thank you.
I also, by the way, wanted to congratulate the organizer who placed your intervention at the end of this Congress. I think that having your talk about preparedness at the end of the Congress was a really good idea to just to remember how long the way is still to go now. But my question is maybe very vague, but I was wondering, I like a lot your idea of deconstructing the way we consider generally preparedness. but I was wondering if, looking at how rich and yes, and multidimensional preparedness is in your perspective, does it mean that we should be ready of never being ready? You see what I mean? Does our new anthropology should be to be ready to accept that we will never be fully prepared? You know, as this dimension we use with the capability approach, it's not something that an absolute that we have to reach, but something comparative, and see if we are going into the direction of more preparedness. And the second, or the sub question, let's say, was, is there maybe a risk of conflict with the transformative dimension of preparedness as you imagine it? Which means, is there maybe a risk, let's say anthropological risk, of being paralyzed of taking action when you're considered that you are not ready for action? Let's say, sure, you have plenty of counterexample to contradict that, but that's just another question in my mind. And again, thanks a lot, and I hope to see you in real very soon.
Thank you, Emily. The first question wasn't a question. I agree, totally agree with you. As for the second question, the paralyzing effects of the second meaning of preparedness, on the contrary, I think that as for our specific practices, which is a practice of research and let's say an animation with people who are engaged in something, we give them space for becoming visible and so on. So our practices are more than ever now, are more than ever engaged, or should be more than ever engaged in inquiring, as I said, in inquiring and search for noticing what is new and what are the possibilities for new life, new combinations, and new social order, elements, single elements, encouraging the recognition of what is possible now. So, thank you. I don't know if I understood your doubt.
No problem.
Great. Thank you, Emily. And we have another question. We still have time for another question by Aditya Barabawaj from the Graduate Institute.
Hi, thank you very much. Am I coming through clear? I'm afraid Perfect. I have a very bad connection today, so I'm awfully sorry if I may have missed some very crucial moments in the talk, but I truly enjoyed whatever I could hear over this very crackly connection today. And it was just amazingly layered and textured, and and dense and compacted, bursting with ideas. And thank you for the food for thought. I wanted to pick up from the very last intervention about the impossibility of preempting, or in certain sense having a stance of preparedness, which in some sense is able to, in a meaningful way, second guess the coming of. So, for example, just to take the very recent COVID example, I mean, COVID emerges in the context of extreme forms of preparedness and scientific knowledge on the question of what pandemics are and what viruses can do and how they can mutate and how they can move between species, etc. So one of the things that is at the very core of sociology of expectation or even anticipation is this conundrum where the fundamental thing that you're unable to second guess and be prepared for is the moment, the precise moment of surprise itself. And so as and when that moment comes, it comes always as a surprise. And that, in a certain sense, is a philosophical conundrum that you could prepare all you like, but when that moment comes, the moment that you've been preparing for, it will surprise you in a way that really creates the problem space within which, to take the COVID example again, we are still, in some sense, grappling with how best to respond to the very unique nature of this emergence. So I just wondered, it's not so much of a question, but invitation to think out loud, that how might we anticipate and be prepared for that moment of surprise within that sort of this rather textured field of expectations and anticipation, which is quite central to sociological thinking on discourses around preemption and so on and so forth. My other very quick question was to do with, and again, I apologize if I missed any crucial detail here because I wasn't able to get the audio very properly over here, was to do with the fact that what you said about us being, the science rather being more prepared to put up a fight vis-a-vis state, or as I understood it at the time, state interventions. And what really occurs to me is that we can no longer think of science and its work in this late liberal moment without invoking the notion of capital itself and in the way in which capital instrumentalizes science and scientific energies. In fact, to broaden the sphere, it would be quite pertinent to say that the triumvirate of state, science, and capital is really the troika, which inhabits this problem space. So where do you see the role of capital vis-a-vis scientific ability to inhabit this problem space and its links to state and state interventions? So I mean, they're not coherent questions, but I think that's what your talk's done. It's really provoked some really interesting set of questions and thought experiments in my head, personally speaking. And I'm truly grateful for your talk today. And it'd be a pleasure to hear your thoughts on these two themes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. You told a lot of things, very interesting things. It is difficult to select questions. I mean that one is what to do about surprise, whether preparedness is contradictory with the element of surprise, which is inner to our job as researchers. If I well understood, this is a very interesting question, but I have the impression that surprise is incorporated in the apparatus of preparedness as intended as a calculistic strategy with a set of governmental technologies, such as, for instance, the repetition itself is a way for neutralize the surprise, for make surprise normal. And we don't know when and what will be tomorrow our next catastrophe. But we know that it is going to happen. So this is a perspective in which surprise is neutralized and recognized as an inner element for preparedness. As for the second question, if I well understood it, I'm not sure. Well, my answer, my reaction, to be more precise, my reaction is that capital, we should avoid to have a totalizing vision of capital and capitalism, which is much more an unpredictable monster, and much more open to be contrasted, to be I know that you could think that in my perspective of collaborative survival, there is much of adaptation to capitalism. But I think that capitalist ruins, in the sense of Anna Tsing, give us the possibility to think about the spaces, the open spaces for practices and perspectives which are not directly capitalist in their character. They are the term she proposes is pericapitalism. Within and outside and within capitalism, these moves are important to learn for us, I think, in our thinking, not simply in our practice as well, because many practices are within and outside at the same time. So we should do the same.
Okay, Ota, I think we are coming to an end. I would have had another question on the issue of plurality, but I don't know to see how your talk connects to the idea of plurality. Is it an extension of plurality that you call for, which means plurality not only in terms of moral orders of words or conventions or whatsoever, but also in terms of including other spacious objects, this kind of thing? Or is it something that is beyond plurality, that says, well, plurality, okay, it was okay at some point, but now if we want to move towards something different, we need to move beyond the plurality principle and try to let's say, to invent something different that goes beyond plurality. But I don't know if maybe we'll have time to explore these ideas another time. So I just want to say, to conclude, except if you want to react on these very vague and ideas that I just mentioned, I just want to conclude you want to react maybe?
Oh, only one joke,
okay.
if you like. I've been fascinated by this expression, which is more than human world. We live in a more than human world. So we need to extend the plurality perspective to other beings, not only humans.
So invent other worlds, not only 6 or 7, but many, many others. Okay.
And this brings in questions of justice, to see whose voices are included and not included in that process, and how to give voices not only to non-humans, but also future generations, for example, as we discussed yesterday with Peter Wagner.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have to conclude it, I'm afraid. So let me just tell you how privileged we are to have had you at the end of this conference. When you accepted our invitation, I was really so grateful and so happy to have had you. This has been our privilege and our pleasure. Thank you enormously for this. I think we have had the opportunity to see a thinking in progress that is being elaborated, being developing, and I am really looking forward to push and to pursue the discussion and to see in which direction you will move forward, and what will come up in the end. How will the thought flourish? But anyway, thank you very much. This was a privilege for all of us and for all the audience. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ota. Thank you.